The crystal didn't just avoid her. It performed a ballet of erasure. Champagne flutes pirouette past her shoulder. Canapés executed tactical detours. The woman in the plain black dress had become a black hole in the middle of a supernova, bending the light of attention around her without touching it. Then the room inhaled. The billionaire walked in, scanned the sea of silk and ambition, and his face ignited with recognition. He didn't just smile. He stopped the world to say her name. 40 minutes before the room learned what a mistake sounded like, Amada Manji paid a taxi driver in cash and watched him disappear down the tree-lined drive of the Langston estate. No leather, no chauffeur, no armor of arrival that announced I belong here because money says so. Just a woman, just a dress, just a test. The gate guard studied her like a forgery he was paid to catch. His eyes moved. Dress, too simple. Hair, too natural. Wrists, too bare. He found her name on the guest list the way you'd find a typo, with suspicion that someone, somewhere, had made a clerical error. Manji, he tried. Mwangi, she corrected, her voice a scalpel. Clean. No heat. He waved her through the way you dismiss a misunderstanding. Amada had worn this invisibility before. In Geneva boardrooms where men assumed she was the translator. In Manhattan penthouses where hostesses asked if she was with the catering company. In 1,000 small murders of assumption that taught her the most valuable lesson of her life. People perform their true selves for an audience of nobodies. Tonight, she was that audience. Victoria Langston wanted $30 million. The paperwork was pristine, a green real estate venture that promised to save the earth while printing money. Amada's analysts had blessed it. The projections sang. The contracts were clean. But Amada had built an empire on a law that no spreadsheet could quantify. Never give power to people who weaponize powerlessness. So she had come dressed as bait. She would watch Victoria in the wild, unguarded, revealing the character hidden beneath the charity galas and TED Talks. And if Victoria failed the test, if she treated the nobody with the cruelty of the insecure elite, Amada would burn $30 million worth of future to ash and never look back. The ballroom was a cathedral to excess. Chandeliers dripped light like melted diamonds. Conversations sparkled with the percussion of networking, each laugh a transaction, each handshake an audit. Old money whispered to new money in the ancient language of who matters here. Amada took a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne. Never champagne. She needed her mind a surgical theater, not a celebration. She positioned herself by the window, a deliberate choice. Prey animals hide. Predators watch. The rejection came in waves. Wave 1. A trio of women in jewel-toned gowns stood 3 feet away, their circle tight as a fist. Amada stepped forward. Without breaking their laughter, they rotated, a synchronized exclusion, until their backs formed a wall. Wave 2. A server approached the couple beside her, offering lobster on mother of pearl. He served them. He pivoted. He walked past Amada, as though she were furniture. Wave 3. A man in a tuxedo made eye contact, smiled reflexively, then his brain caught up to his eyes. The smile died. He turned away mid-stride. She was being read, calculated, and deleted. Amada's lips almost curved. The data was collecting beautifully. Across the room, she caught the gaze of a young black man in server's whites. His name tag read James. He was the only other person of color in a room worth $1 billion. Their eyes met for half a second, a transmission that needed no translation. I see you. You see me. We both see exactly what this room is. He nodded. She nodded back. The alliance was silent, instant, and real. 23 minutes into the gala, the whispers began circulating like a virus. Amada didn't need to hear the words. She could see them in the geometry of the room. The way heads tilted, the way eyes darted to her and away, carrying judgments like contraband. Then Victoria Langston materialized. The hostess moved like a woman who had choreographed her life. Hair, architectural perfection. Dress, Valentino, the shade of champagne and ambition. Smile, engineered in the laboratories of private schools and cotillions. Victoria's eyes landed on Amada. Something cracked beneath the polish. A flash of displeasure quickly spackled over with practiced grace. She didn't approach. That would acknowledge the problem. Instead, She positioned herself within earshot, surrounded by her inner circle of accomplices, and raised her voice just enough. "I must have a word with security," Victoria said, fingering a diamond bracelet that cost more than most people's homes. "I don't know how they're letting just anyone wander in. You'd think this was a soup kitchen." The laughter that followed was sharp, performative, and designed to carry. A woman beside her, Diana Ross Peton, a trust fund aristocrat with a face like polished cruelty, leaned in to deliver the kill shot. "Maybe she got lost on her way to the service entrance," Diana purred. "Someone should escort her back to the help." The laughter got louder. "Hungrier?" Amada turned her head. Slowly. Just enough to meet Victoria's eyes. Victoria flinched. Looked away. Interesting, Amada thought, filing the reaction in her mental ledger. She knows she's wrong. She's doing it anyway. Minutes bled into each other. Amada didn't move. Didn't retreat. Didn't offer them the satisfaction of her discomfort. She stood like a monument in the middle of their cruelty, immovable, unreadable, unbowed. A man approached, tall, expensive suit, nervous energy. Marcus Bradley, Victoria's husband. Amada's research team had profiled him, a man who married into power and surrendered his spine as the dowry. He opened his mouth as if to apologize. Then his eyes flicked to Victoria across the room. She was watching. Her expression was a command. Marcus's mouth closed. He gave Amada a grimace he probably thought was bravery and retreated. Amada watched him go. Coward, she thought. He knows exactly what's happening, and he's choosing comfort over courage. That told her everything. Her phone pulsed softly in her clutch. She glanced down. Richard Ashford, arriving in 30 minutes. "Don't leave. I want you to meet some people. Actually, I want them to meet you." Amada felt something sharp and sweet move through her chest. Not quite amusement. Not quite vengeance. Something richer. Richard Ashford. The only man who had bet on her when she was nothing but a dream and a heartbeat. 15 years ago, she'd stood in front of a room of investors in Nairobi and pitched a radical idea. Venture capital for African women entrepreneurs. The room had laughed. Actually laughed. Richard had stayed. He'd asked questions. Real ones. Questions that proved he listened instead of performed listening. A week later, he'd written her a check for $500,000 and said, "I'm not investing in your idea. I'm investing in your inevitability." Now she ran a $2 billion fund. And he was about to walk into this room and detonate every assumption these people had made about her. Amada slipped her phone back into her clutch and returned her gaze to the glittering cruelty around her. Let them laugh, she thought. In 30 minutes, they'll learn what it costs to be cruel to the wrong person. The experiment was almost over. The reckoning was about to begin. The champagne knew to stay away. Amada watched the golden liquid orbit her like she was radioactive. Servers moved through the ballroom with trays held high, offering bubbles to women draped in silk, to men whose cufflinks cost more than cars. But when they neared her corner by the window, their trajectories curved, bent, avoided. She was a dark spot on a white canvas, invisible by design. The ballroom hummed with the machinery of wealth. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors. Diamonds caught that light and threw it back, 1,000 tiny declarations of worth. Conversations rose and fell in practiced rhythms. Laughter on cue, compliments delivered like investments, every word calculated for return. Amada held her glass of water and watched them perform. A cluster of women stood 5 feet away. Emerald gowns, ruby lips, platinum hair swept into architectural achievements. One of them glanced in Amada's direction, her eyes skating over the plain black dress, the absence of jewelry, the natural hair that refused to apologize for its existence. The woman's face did something subtle, a tightening around the mouth. A flicker of distaste quickly smoothed away. She turned back to her circle and whispered something. 3 heads bent closer. Laughter erupted, sharp and bright as breaking glass. Amada's pulse didn't quicken. Her expression didn't shift. She had learned long ago that reaction was permission. If you flinched, they knew they'd landed the blow. So she stood perfectly still. A waiter approached the couple beside her, a silver-haired man and his wife, both draped in the easy arrogance of inherited wealth. The waiter offered canapes arranged like tiny works of art. The couple took one each, murmured their thanks. The waiter turned, looked directly at Amada, then walked past her as if she were a shadow on the wall. Amada felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger. Colder than that. The ice of confirmation. The brutal clarity of seeing exactly what you suspected proven true. She lifted her glass to her lips and took a slow sip. Across the room, Victoria Langston was holding court. The hostess moved through her guests like a conductor through an orchestra, orchestrating admiration with every gesture. Her Valentino dress caught the light with every turn. Her smile was a weapon of mass seduction. Victoria's eyes found Amada. For half a second, something ugly flickered beneath the polish. Then it was gone, buried under another perfect smile. But Amada had seen it. The experiment had already begun. 40 minutes earlier, the taxi had smelled like old leather and broken dreams. Amada sat in the back seat watching the Langston estate grow larger through the windshield. A mansion of white stone and arrogance perched on a hill like a crown. The driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, confusion written across his weathered face. "You sure this is right, miss?" he asked. "Usually folks going here come in those long black cars." "I'm sure," Amada said. She paid in cash. Watched him pull away, taillights disappearing down the tree-lined drive like fleeing witnesses. The gate guard stepped out of his booth. Mid-40s. Thick neck. Eyes that had learned to judge worth in 3 seconds or less. Those eyes moved over her now. Dress, too simple. Shoes, too practical. Wrists, bare. Neck, unadorned. The absence of diamonds was an accusation. Name. His voice carried the boredom of a man who had already decided she didn't belong. Mwangi. Amada Mwangi. He checked his list. Frowned. Checked again. Manji. Mwangi. She didn't correct his pronunciation with warmth. She corrected it like a teacher marking a test. He found her name. His frown deepened, like he'd discovered a typo in the universe. He waved her through without welcome, without warmth, with nothing but the grudging acknowledgement that someone, somewhere, had made a mistake in letting her through. Amada walked past him. This was why she had come. Not for Victoria's champagne or her chandeliers or her desperate pitch for $30 million. She had come for this exact moment. This precise flavor of contempt. Because Amada had learned something building her empire from nothing. Numbers could lie, but cruelty always told the truth. Victoria Langston's green real estate proposal was beautiful on paper. Her projections sang. Her vision was compelling enough to seduce lesser investors. But Amada had a rule carved into her bones from 15 years of watching power destroy people. Never give money to anyone who treats powerlessness like a disease. She had seen too many brilliant projects crumble because the people running them were brilliant at everything except basic human decency. Had watched charismatic CEOs build empires on the backs of people they considered beneath notice. So tonight, she would watch Victoria in her natural habitat. See how she treated the woman in the plain black dress. The woman she assumed had no power, no influence, no ability to change her fortune. If Victoria passed the test, the $30 million was hers. If she failed, Amada's lips curved. Not quite a smile. Something sharper. If Victoria failed, she would learn what it cost to be cruel to the wrong person. Diana Ross Peton had the kind of beauty that came from never being told no. She stood in Victoria's inner circle, a woman whose bone structure was her inheritance and whose cruelty was her currency. Her dress was the color of old money. Her laugh was the sound of gates closing. And right now, she was looking directly at Amada. "I really must speak to security," Victoria was saying, her voice pitched to carry like a stone thrown across still water. "I'm simply baffled how they're letting just anyone wander in off the street." The women around her leaned closer, sensing blood. Diana's smile sharpened. Perhaps she got confused. "The service entrance is around back, darling." Laughter exploded. Bright. Vicious. Designed to wound. "Someone should probably escort her to the kitchen," Diana continued, examining her manicure like she was discussing the weather. "I'm sure the help is wondering where she went." More laughter. Louder now. Feeding on itself. Amada felt the words land. Felt them sink in like hooks designed to catch and tear. Her hands wanted to shake. Her jaw wanted to clench. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to turn around, to walk out, to leave these people to their cruelty and their champagne and their beautiful, hollow lives. But she didn't move. She stood perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask, her body a monument to refusal. Do not give them your reaction. Do not let them see they landed the blow. She lifted her glass of water to her lips, took a slow, deliberate sip, lowered it again. Her heart was hammering. Her blood was singing with rage. But her face showed nothing. Across the room, Victoria was watching, waiting to see if the insult would take root, if Amada would shrink or flee, or show some crack in her armor that Victoria could exploit. Amada turned her head, slowly, met Victoria's gaze with the full weight of her attention. Victoria's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for Amada to see the flicker of something underneath, uncertainty, maybe, or recognition that she had just made a tactical error. Then Victoria looked away first. Amada filed that moment away in the cold storage of her memory. Diana was still talking, her voice a scalpel dressed in silk. I mean, really, what kind of event planner allows this? Victoria, darling, you're far too kind. Too inclusive. The word inclusive landed like a slur. Amada's fingers tightened around her glass. The water inside trembled, just slightly. She thought about the $30 million sitting in her fund. Thought about Victoria's face when she learned exactly who she'd just insulted. But not yet. Not yet. She needed to see how far Victoria would let this go, how deep the cruelty ran. So she stood there, a ghost at the gala, a dark spot they couldn't erase. And she waited. James appeared like an answer to a question she hadn't asked aloud. He moved through the crowd with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to occupy space without claiming it. Servers' whites. Silver tray. The kind of face people looked through instead of at. But Amada saw him. He approached her corner by the window, his path deliberate, cutting through the clusters of wealth and wine like a swimmer through dark water. Their eyes met. In that half-second of contact, an entire conversation happened without words. I see you. I see you too. I know what this room is. So do I. James stopped in front of her, lifted his tray. On it, a single glass of water, fresh and cold, condensation already forming on the crystal. You look like you could use a refill, he said quietly. Amada glanced at her current glass, still half full. They both knew this wasn't about the water. Thank you, she said, taking the fresh glass. James's eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. She saw recognition in them. Not the kind that came from knowing someone's name or face. The deeper kind. The kind that came from sharing the same invisible scars. He was the only other black person in a room full of people who had decided that melanin was a deficit in the ledger of human worth. They don't see us, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Makes them dangerous. Or careless, Amada replied. Something flickered in his expression. Almost a smile. You're not what they think you are. It wasn't a question. No, Amada said. I'm not. Good. He nodded once, a gesture of solidarity that felt like a handshake. A pact, a promise. Because they deserve what's coming. Before she could respond, a voice cut across the space between them. Excuse me. Sharp. Imperious. Diana Ross Peton approaching like a battleship under full sail. Are you fraternizing with the guests? James's face went carefully blank. Just offering water, ma'am. Well, she's clearly had enough. Diana waved her hand dismissively. Move along. There are people here who actually matter who need service. The words hung in the air like poison gas. James didn't flinch, didn't argue. He simply nodded, gave Amada one last look, stay strong, and melted back into the crowd. Diana turned her attention to Amada, looked her up and down with the clinical detachment of someone appraising livestock. You really shouldn't monopolize the staff, Diana said. It's terribly inconsiderate. Amada felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. She had been insulted before, had faced racism dressed in expensive suits and polite smiles her entire professional life. But this was different. This was cruelty for sport. I'll keep that in mind, Amada said, her voice smooth as glass. Diana's smile was all edges. See that you do. She walked away, hips swaying, already laughing about something with another woman in her orbit. Amada stood there, holding the glass of water James had brought her. Her hands were steady, but inside, something was counting down. Tick, tick, tick. The room changed before Richard Ashford even entered it. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned toward the double doors like compass needles finding magnetic north. The energy in the ballroom shifted, tightened, became electric with anticipation. Victoria Langston straightened, her smile sharpening into something predatory and triumphant. This was the moment she had orchestrated the entire evening around. Richard Ashford, tech billionaire, philanthropist, kingmaker, was about to walk into her gala and crown her the next darling of Silicon Valley. She had arranged this introduction through back channels and favor trading, had spent months positioning herself as the perfect investment opportunity. The doors opened. Richard entered. 6'2", silver hair, a face that had graced the cover of Forbes a dozen times. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had learned that the world would wait for him. The crowd parted. An automatic response to power, bodies shifting to create a corridor toward Victoria. She stepped forward, hand extended, smile radiant as a spotlight. Richard, her voice rang with warmth calculated to the decimal point. I'm so thrilled you could. Richard walked past her. Didn't stop. Didn't slow. Didn't acknowledge her outstretched hand or her perfectly crafted greeting. He walked straight toward the window, toward the woman in the plain black dress, toward Amada. The ballroom went silent. The kind of silence that happens when reality breaks from the script and no one knows what comes next. Richard's face transformed. Not the polite smile of networking. Something real. Something that looked like joy. Amada, he said, his voice carrying across the frozen room. There you are. He opened his arms. She stepped into the embrace. The room watched. Every eye, every breath held. When they separated, Richard kept one hand on her shoulder, turning to address the crowd like a teacher about to deliver a lesson they should have already learned. For those of you who don't know, he said, his voice easy but edged with something sharp, this is Amada Mwangi. She runs one of the most successful venture capital funds in the world. $2 billion under management. Triple-digit returns. And, he paused, let the silence stretch. One of the smartest investors I've ever had the privilege to learn from. The silence deepened, became crushing. Victoria's face was doing something terrible. The mask of confidence was cracking, pieces of it falling away to reveal panic underneath. Her eyes darted from Richard to Amada and back again, trying to recalculate an equation that no longer made sense. Diana Ross Peton had gone pale. Actually pale. Her mouth was slightly open, frozen mid-breath. Amada watched them. Watched the realization dawn like a sunrise made of regret. Richard was still talking. I'm actually here as her guest tonight. She called me last week, said she might have found an interesting investment opportunity. He glanced at Amada. How's that working out? Amada's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. I'm still gathering data, she said quietly. Victoria took a step forward. Her hands were shaking. Amada, Ms. Mwangi, I had no idea. No, Amada agreed. You didn't. The words fell like stones into still water, and the room held its breath, waiting to see what came next. Victoria's recovery was almost impressive. The panic smoothed away. The mask rebuilt itself in real time. She manufactured a laugh, bright and hollow as a bell. What a delightful surprise. Victoria's voice was too loud, too bright, straining at the seams. Amada and I were we've been discussing the most fascinating project. Haven't we? Amada said nothing. Victoria's smile stretched tighter. Richard, you must let me steal her away for just a moment. Girl talk. You understand. Richard glanced at Amada. She gave him a small nod. He stepped back, but didn't leave. Stayed close enough to watch, to witness. Victoria moved closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Amada, Ms. Mwangi, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? Amada's voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that came before storms. I didn't realize. Victoria's hands fluttered, a desperate ballet. If I had known who you were. There it is. Amada cut through the performance like a scalpel. If you had known. Victoria froze. If you had known I had money, Amada continued, her voice still soft but carrying a weight that made nearby conversations die. You would have treated me differently. Is that what you're saying? The night air was cold and clean after the perfume-choked ballroom. Amada stood at the top of the steps, watching a yellow taxi pull up the circular drive. The same kind of taxi that had brought her. No limousine. No driver in a pressed suit. Just transportation. Just a way out. You enjoyed that more than you should have, Richard said beside her, but he was smiling. I enjoyed it exactly the right amount, Amata replied. Behind them, the ballroom was still buzzing with the aftermath. Tomorrow, the story would spread. Victoria Langston would become a cautionary tale whispered at fundraisers and galas across the city. But that wasn't why Amata had done it. She had done it because cruelty needed to have consequences. Because power without accountability was just tyranny in a ball gown. Ms. Mwangi. She turned. James stood at the edge of the steps, still in his server's whites, his shift clearly over. His eyes held the same recognition they had earlier. The same unspoken understanding. I wanted to say thank you, he said quietly, for what you did in there. I didn't do it for applause, Amata said. I know. James paused. But still, thank you. Amata studied him. Saw something in his eyes that reminded her of herself 15 years ago. Hungry, brilliant, waiting for someone to see past the uniform to the potential underneath. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a business card, held it out. What's your degree in? She asked. James blinked. Economics. Stanford. Graduated last year. And you're serving champagne to people like Victoria Langston. Student loans, he said simply. And no one returns my emails. Amata's smile was sharp. They will now. Call my office Monday morning. Ask for Maria. Tell her I sent you. We're hiring analysts. James took the card with shaking hands. Stared at it like it might disappear. I don't know what to say. Say you'll show up ready to work. Amata's voice was firm. I don't give handouts. I give opportunities. What you do with it is up to you. I won't let you down. I know. She turned toward the waiting taxi. Because if you do, you'll be the one serving champagne at my next gala. James laughed. Actual, surprised laughter. Amata slid into the back seat. Richard climbed in beside her. Through the window, she could see James still standing there, holding her card, his entire future rewritten in the span of 30 seconds. The taxi pulled away from the Langston estate. Victoria had lost $30 million tonight. But James had just gained a future. And as the mansion disappeared behind them, Amata felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction. Something deeper. Justice, maybe. Or maybe just the simple, radical act of seeing people for who they were instead of what they wore. The taxi turned onto the main road. Amata closed her eyes and smiled.